the New Testament of singleness and doubleness. For instance, this is a kind of a mysterious, difficult passage, Matthew 6:19 through 23. In our earlier tapes that aren't available anymore, of course, we dealt with this, and whatever we said there is the same as what we believe now on doubleness and singleness here in these verses. But I was asked by someone just a few days ago, what does this passage mean? And I was tempted to say, we've already covered it before, but I explained it to them again. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. Now we're going to end up with doubleness and singleness here. And doubleness and singleness now, by the way, can apply to anything. The doubleness can apply to anything. Here it's going to apply to worldly riches. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. Well, should we take a pause and teach on the faith message for a while about that? He says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on the earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now look at these two verses. The light of the body is the eye. Well, really, the eye is not the light of the body. It's the doorway through which light enters the body. Of all of the nerves that you have, you could slice your flesh open and expose those nerves. Guess what? You only have two, one in each eye. They're optical nerves that are sensitive to light. The other nerves are sensitive to hacking and cutting on them, but sensitive to light so that it can receive light and transmit it to the brain, and the brain can end up with a message from that. Remarkable two nerves that you have. We have thousands and millions of nerves in the body, but only the so-called optical nerves are sensitive to light. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be what? Single. Well, you see, it's a difficult way that it's been said. That's why it almost takes a little commentary, or not translation, but interpretation here. Because how can your eye really be single? You have to add in some words of explanation. Thy whole body shall be full of light. What he's saying there is, if your eye is set on the one single correct object, which he just told us is heaven in verse 21, then your whole body will be filled with the light which represents truth that comes from heaven. If you don't add in words, you'll end up with a mystical notion of what he's saying here. If thine eye be single, what's he saying? Cyclops is the most spiritual person ever born. If thine eye be single, that is, it has single focus or single attention upon a single solitary object. Hence the concept of singleness in Scripture. I wasn't talking about not being married when I said singleness. Thine whole body shall be full of light. Well, you see, we could ask this. This is what someone says. Well, what if your eye is single, and that means that it's set upon a single object, but it's set on the wrong object? He just says, he didn't say which object. He just says, if thine eye be single, then thy whole body shall be full of light. Well, it's understood from verse 21. It's understood from verse 21 that if your eye is single, it can only be set on what's good. Because you think about this, there's something built into man. It's his conscience, according to Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 16. There's something in man where when he's wicked, he has his eye set upon wicked things, but he seems to also have his eye set on good as well. His heart condemns him. His heart convicts him. How many have been the stories of bank robbers, murderers, or whatever that had some glimmer of hope or desire sometime in their life to reform themselves and to come out of all of it? They're trying to head towards something that's good. And we could also say in the second place that if you are double-eyed, your eye is not singly set upon that which is good, it's set upon that which is bad. It's probably set upon many objects of that which is bad, not set singly on one single thing, but as I said with leaven, it will leaven the whole life. It will be set on many various things. Verse 23, but if thine eye, now he doesn't say be double, but that's the concept that he means here. If thine eye be evil, because see, single and evil are not opposites of one another. Single and double are good and evil, but single represents good and evil represents double. So it is a difficult passage. If thine eye be evil, or we could say double, thine whole body shall be full of darkness. And then notice this strange phrase. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, then how great is that darkness? Well, light can't be darkness, but he means that which enters into the person, which we know from our optical nerves is light. It represents light. Whatever's entering in, whatever one has his attention or his desires or his focus set upon, then it enters in the sense of light, but it is really not light. It's darkness. And he said, how great is that darkness? Notice how strong the last statement is. Of course, we're given even a little extra punctuation in the King James, and we don't have this too many times. You'll have it in the modern versions, but not in the King James, an exclamation point. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, in other words, if thine eye be evil, or if thine eye be double, then how great will be the darkness that will come upon the person in their life. So Jesus taught that to have a single eye, which means to have a pure heart, is to be full of light. Matthew 6:22. The apostles taught the doctrine of singleness of heart. Let's look at a few cases of this. The apostles taught the doctrine of singleness of heart. And this should always be studied in connection with purity or with cleanliness. Ephesians chapter 6. Look at a few places where, well, first of all, Paul, and then just the apostles in the early church taught this doctrine. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 5. Slaves, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh. Every employee out there hear that? It's all of us who are employees. We're all employees of someone. And he goes on to say, because really you're serving the Lord. Verse 7, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men. That's why I can say we all are employed. With fear and trembling. We've discussed that phrase before in another connection, I remember. With fear and trembling. And look at this, in singleness of your heart. Where did Paul get that concept? In singleness of your heart as unto Christ. He's talking about the single eye concept of the Sermon on the Mount. That the heart is focused totally on Christ. He says as unto Christ, not on your earthly boss, but that it's focused totally on Christ. There, we would have the concept of singleness. Now it's not singleness of eye, it's singleness of heart. But it's the same thing, exactly the same thing, just expressed with different words. It's found again in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22, just repeated here. The epistles were written maybe the same day. Slaves, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart. Colossians 3:22, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And then how about Acts 2 in verse 46? Those are two Pauline passages. Acts 2:46 is a Lucan text, but it refers to the entire early church based on the doctrine of the apostles in verse 42. Acts chapter 2 and verse 46. They continuing daily with one accord. That almost sounds like singleness right there. But he's going to express it in that way in just a moment. In the temple and breaking bread from house to house did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. Concept is found those three times in addition to the original instruction in Matthew 6 and verse 22. So I would say that it means that the complete man, the whole man, is devoted entirely to the purpose and the will of Christ. It's basically what he means by singleness of heart. The complete man, you completely, the complete man is devoted entirely to the purpose and the will of Christ. With your affection and with your attention directed only to him. With your affection and with your attention directed only to him. According to Matthew 6, your hope is heaven, and your heart set on the Lord Jesus. It kind of reminds me of the blessed man of Psalm 1. You're the blessed man of Psalm 1 when you live with singleness of heart. The other one is the one who walks, stands, and sits with the ungodly, with the sinner, and with the scornful. He's probably the double-hearted or the double-minded man. Now, the equation, you say, well, now how do we really know that we are to equate these concepts of singleness with purity or with cleanliness? Well, turn over to James, the book of James, and I think I can show you that the New Testament in two places, especially in the latter of the two, seems to equate the New Testament concept of singleness with that of purity and cleanliness. First of all, we have James 1 and verse 8. James is the one that's going to mention it twice. James 1, we'll have to read a little earlier, up to verse 5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith. Okay, there's singleness. Your heart is set on the one that you just asked, verse 5, and it's set on him because you've asked in faith. Nothing wavering. Oh, we must be moving to the concept of doubleness now. A heart or a mind that's set on two things, that's controlled by two things. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. What's a wave? Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. That's not singleness, that's doubleness there. Sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down. And let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord, because a double-minded, now we have it for the first time mentioned in the New Testament, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. My experiences with unstable people prove that unstable people are double-minded. Their heart, their affection, their attention is not zeroed in and concentrated and fixed upon heaven and the Lord Jesus. Then if you'll turn over to chapter 4 and verse 8. Here the connection seems to be undeniable between single-mindedness, having a single heart or singleness of heart, and purity or cleanliness. James 4:8, draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Maybe we even have some parallelism here, because James, remember, is kind of the Jewish writer of the New Testament. His book is filled with morality, much like the book of Proverbs. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners. Okay, notice the word cleanse there. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners. Well, probably doesn't mean hands. It's probably a figure of speech here. That hands represent what you do in life. Your feet represent where you go in life, essentially your whole life. Your hands represent what you do in life, essentially your whole life as well. So here's the parallelism. And purify. Now the two words there, cleanse and purify, they're different Greek words, but they're very, very similar. They mean the same thing. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners. And so if it's parallelism, that means that cleanse equals purify, hands equals hearts, and sinners equal double-mindedness. That's the way you would organize parallelism. Cleanse or purify your hands or your hearts, ye sinners or ye double-minded. Uh-oh, what do we have James calling double-minded people? Sinners. A double-minded person is a sinner. It can be double-mindedness we saw in Matthew 6 in the area of financial provision, and it can be double-mindedness in a multitude of other areas as well. And he seems to be equating sinners with people that are double-minded. He just said back in chapter 1, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, and don't let that man think that he will receive anything from the Lord. And essentially you don't. Whenever you're double-minded, you don't receive anything from the Lord. And we're on another point here. I was just pointing that out, but really we're on another point. I'm saying he seems to equate purity of heart with single-mindedness, and we'd see that from the second part of this parallelism here. Purify your hearts, ye double-minded. In other words, it seems like what he's saying is if ye purify your hearts, that will make you single-minded then. Could he say here, purify your hearts, ye single-minded? No, that'd be impossible to say. Because if you're single-minded, you have a clean heart because you don't have any dirt. It's not fixed on anything else in the person's life. So James 4:8c would prove to me that there is an equation in the New Testament between purity as the primal Christian virtue and singleness of mind or singleness of heart. Henry has to say this: these are terms that indicate the whole man devoted exclusively to the will of God in the face of temptation and external pressure. Now there's something I haven't brought out yet. How and when could a person ever end up double-minded? Well, probably only in times of temptation and external pressure, when you have the option. Something is put before you as a temptation to fix your attention upon, to fix your heart upon. There's where you have the occasion to turn from single-mindedness to double-mindedness. The single-minded are free from judgment that hangs over those who compromise perverse principles and reprehensible motives. He doesn't mince words here. He didn't say, well, you made a mistake. He says if you're double-minded, you have compromised perverse principles and reprehensible motives. The smallest sin is a powerful, potent force. This somewhat strange word leads naturally to the notion of the truth as that which is to be done and not simply comprehended, doers and not hearers only. Moral action, therefore, rises out of the pure heart and its uncompromised devotion to the good. Remember, we looked at motives for doing what's right, and one motive was a love for the good. Not good things or good men, as some versions will say over in Titus chapter 1, but a lover of good. Do you remember that passage? No. We don't need to turn there. We'll turn there anyway because I'm not getting a quick enough response. You have to say yes fast and all. And everyone. Titus chapter 1 and verse 8. A lover of hospitality, a lover of good. Men, they thought, minority opinion, good things. It's just good, not men or things. Good. The good life. The good life. A lover of good. A lover, in other words, a lover to do good, to do that which is good. I'm not trying to use it as an adverb, and I would be using well instead of good, but a lover to do good simply for good's sake. Not for anything else, for good's sake. A Christian likes to do the good for the sake of the good. The heart, the eye, the mind, the body are not to be half-heartedly given to God while still anchored in this world. They are to be instruments of divine righteousness. The pure heart is not led astray by inordinate desires, nor allured by temptation. That's the point I want to come to, and that's the point I've already brought out before. The pure heart is not led astray by inordinate desires, nor allured by temptation. Why? Because there are no hooks of evil, hooks of unclean spots in the heart of the person that will attach itself to sin whenever sin passes by you or you pass by sin. That's a pretty weighty statement that he's making here, that the pure heart cannot be led astray by inordinate desires, and it cannot be allured by temptation. Why? Because there is nothing in the heart to which sin can attach itself when it's pure, when it's clean. And you don't just get that because you hear this message this morning or something. You get it, we see over there in 1 Peter 1:22, you purify your souls by obeying the truth, by doing all that we know to do as our responsibility with the life that we have as Christians. Then it takes away the place that Satan would have in the Christian's life then. I mean, it's so simple to put these things into practice. You take away the very thing that he's going to use in you against you by bringing something along that will be enticing and that will attach itself to you or you to it. What is pure is uncompounded. Now he's using it not in the sense of clean, but in the sense of admixture. What is pure is uncompounded. You know, we speak of pure gold or pure silver or pure copper. The coins that we have are not pure. They're compounded coins. They're not uncompounded. They're compounded coins because you don't have all copper, all silver, or all nickel in there. You have other metals that are mixed in. What is pure is uncompounded, but he's saying this is what the Christian's heart should be, uncompounded, free from admixture with sin and falsehood. It shares the straightforwardness. You might think that I read this and then got my message from it, but we just get our messages, myself as well as Henry, as well as any other evangelical scholar, will just get it from your knowledge of the Bible. But listen to this statement here, because I remember teaching on this recently. It shares the straightforwardness and the guilelessness of unspoiled childhood. Amen. We started that in Matthew 18. You have to be like a little child. And one thing, they have no guile. They're very straightforward in what they have to say. That's part of a pure heart, in other words, being like a child. It shares the straightforwardness and the guilelessness of unspoiled childhood. A frankness and openness that has nothing to hide. You meet so many people that are not frank or open. We were talking as we were going out the door this morning. I don't know how, I know how the subject got brought up, but people are so ungrateful and unthankful. And basically it's because they're dishonest in this world. I don't know how many times I'm thinking of one thing. I don't know if I want to mention. Well, I might as well, because it doesn't apply to anyone around here. But I would write a letter to someone to thank them about something they did, or to ask a question or something, and you get no response at all. I wrote some people that I had stayed with and that I had conversed with down at the seminary here a few weeks ago. No response at all. I just cannot imagine. That is such a disgrace to one's personality. It's just such a disgrace not to acknowledge the receipt of something from someone else. Just write a letter and you hear nothing at all. Not a quick line that at least I got the letter, no letter in response. And that's not the first time. That happens, it seems like, in my life all the time. You'll send someone something and not a single response. I don't know how many times I've tried to contact old Bruce Kinsey through the mail. You get him over the telephone because he's stuck. He's got to talk then. Write a letter, no response, no acknowledgement. And I tell my wife, I come out of my study fussing and fuming and losing the victory and mad and angry and boiling and smoking. I said, that is such a disgrace to be a human. That's like a dog or an animal or a tree. That you're such a disgrace in your communicative skills as a human being, of being a responsible human being, that you don't even acknowledge someone's presence, someone's time they took to write or to call or whatever. Maybe we can all take a lesson from that. Maybe there's some times where it's necessary that you don't respond. I'm not saying that you always have to do something, but wow, I mean, I was brought up differently as a lost person. If someone says hello, you say hello back. You don't just ignore them. You say hello back. We live in such a wicked world, a double world. Their mind is set on so many thousand different things, I guess, they forget what to do that day. They forget someone showed them singleness of mind that day. It is unashamed in openness of mind and heart and requires no mask because there is nothing to conceal. Then he goes on mentioning something else I'll get into. I'll tell you when to start writing. He draws some things from Dewar's writings. The words scandalizo and scandalon are frequently found on Jesus' lips, indicating his concern with the moral significance of giving offense and causing others to stumble. Those are words many times translated offense or stumble. We get our word scandal from those words. The word scandalon in the New Testament has only an ethical significance. It designates an offense that tempts or entices to sin. The word scandalizo, which is not found in the Greek writers, although it does occur in the Septuagint and Apocrypha, is common in the New Testament. The believer is not to be an occasion of sin either in his own life or in the lives of others. How do you like that? We've always thought of being an occasion to sin. We cause others to sin. You can be an occasion for your own self to sin with a double heart. That's what he's saying here. It's all connected with double-mindedness or having a double heart. But it is to be separated from what seduces to unbelief and immorality. He does not provoke false views about the Christian life, nor unbelief in Christ. He refuses to be a temptation to the rejection of the Redeemer or to apostasy from the faith. It is man's abnormal moral condition which causes him to be a stumbling block and so give rise to the woes of humanity. Matthew 18:7. Redemptive ethics, in counteracting this condition, seeks to remove whatever imperils moral judgment and behavior. Purity of heart has implications manward as well as Godward, and refuses to cause others to sin or to draw them toward evil. Whosoever offends one of these is a phrase appearing on Jesus' lips in introduction to some of his sternest warnings. And the theme of unjustifiable offense is caught up again by Paul, Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, and by John in 1 John 2 and verse 10. And then he goes on to mention again from Dewar's writings a note that he appends here on ethical compromises which Jesus especially condemns. Maybe you want to write this down. He lists fornication, covetousness, hypocrisy, and foolishness. Fornication, covetousness, hypocrisy, and foolishness. And says each of which holds prominence in Jesus' teaching. You go through those lists of the heathen vices and you'll find these time and time again, or the idea there time and time again. In each case, the emphasis falls on the inner disposition as fundamental to the outer manifestation. In each case, the emphasis falls on the inner disposition as fundamental to the outer manifestation. And all we have here is just part of it. Then let me give you the connection he makes between four other concepts and those four concepts that I've just given you. Fornication, he says, rises from lust. Well, that's true, and that makes sense. You have the outward committing of the act fornication because of the inner disposition, and it's a wicked one of the heart. Fornication rises from lust. Covetousness, well, before telling you what he says, I can see how you could think of several things, but this, I think, is essentially based on Matthew chapter 6. Covetousness would arise from what? Think before you speak. Matthew 6, 25 through 34. Why would a person be covetous? You could say because you're greedy, but both basically it's the same thing. What? Cares of worldly things. What? Pride. Lust. We've already got lust. What about Matthew 6, 25 to 34? What's the statement he says there 5 times not to do? Take no thought. Okay, anxiety then. That's an excellent idea. Covetousness arises from anxiety. You have to have these things put down in this way. You never thought of them exactly like this. Covetousness arises from anxiety. You're anxious over material needs and you become covetous. Hypocrisy arises from mental dishonesty. Because hypocrisy, a hypocrite generally, in the New Testament is dealing with one's outer life. So that arises from mental dishonesty. Half-truths, white lies, or just the failure to be true to your own self. A failure to take the time to learn you as you are. Weighty sins, fornication, covetousness, hypocrisy, and fourthly and finally, foolishness. Foolishness, he says, arises from 2 things. Pride, that's interesting, and a lack of humility. And that's interesting as well. Foolishness arises from pride and a lack of humility. Well, in light of this, let's look at Matthew 6, this concept of singleness and doubleness. Notice what Jesus' one statement warning about it is. It's in verse 24. And that is, no man can be double-minded. Not and get into the kingdom is his point. Everybody is double-minded except Christians, and many Christians are. So again, we supply words to give the full understanding. No man can be double-minded and expect to make it into the kingdom. No man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. And it can go back and forth from one to the other. Ye cannot serve God and worldly riches. Mammon. The old King James word mammon. Sounds like the woolly mammoth, but that's not what he's talking about there. He's talking about the context of verses 19 through 34, and it's financial, material provision in this life. Very interesting. Covetousness arises from anxiety. And then a final point we come to on this subject of the doctrine of purity. You see how much there is to learn about each little concept that it's so simple that sometimes we miss the truth of something because it's so simple. We get into a big thing on predestination. We think purity, well, I'm pure. Basically, I'm pure. Basically, I'm clean. Basically, I'm single-minded, single-hearted. That's not necessarily true at all. I think you'll find more people, even Christians, even in the church. James has written to Christians over there. Purify yourselves, ye your hearts. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, ye double-minded. Christians, ye sinners. He calls them sinners there. It's written to sinning Christians, evidently, if we can have such a contradiction.
For the continuation of
It's written to sinning Christians, evidently, if we can have such a contradiction. The Scriptures in the third place. First place was meaning, back in the first message. The second place, concepts of singleness and doubleness. The third place, the eschatological context of heart purity. We gave you the meaning in the first message on purity. The beginning of this message, up till now, we've looked at the concepts, the dual concepts of singleness and doubleness. We come to a third major division in this study. And the final one, the Scriptures have much to say about our purity eschatologically, that is, with reference to the appearing of Jesus Christ. I think Matthew 5:8 is, of course, the first place to begin. Blessed are the clean in heart, for they shall see God. Now that's a verse, you see, that can't be fulfilled, not in its literal sense in this life. We don't see God. We're going to see Him in the next life. So a lot of what you find here, probably all of what you find here, well, I'll take it one step further. Definitely all of what you find here. Beatitudes is all eschatological. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We don't really get the kingdom until the next life. It's all eschatological. None of this happens in this life. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. You're ever really going to stop mourning? Oh, there may be periods you stop and have total fulfilling comfort, not until Revelation chapter 21. Said, in that day I'll wipe all tears away. There'll be no more pain and no more remembrance of those things. There's a final eschatological comfort that will come for the Christian. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Most of what you've got is maybe an acre or two. He says the meek will inherit the earth. Well, you wouldn't want the earth in this life with all of its acid rain and polluted streams and dying trout. You wouldn't want the earth in this life. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. They will be filled. That's next life for that type of filling. The merciful, they'll obtain mercy in the next life in that measure. Blessed are the clean in heart, and here's the reward of the promise, and it's an eschatological promise, they shall see God. Then that brings up the question, what's going to happen when the second advent occurs and Christians are called double-minded? Well, I have an easy answer, and that is to say that is beyond our subject this morning. 2 Corinthians 11. So moving right along, 2 Corinthians 11, getting off that theme now. What's going to happen if a Christian's called double-minded? The second advent. 2 Corinthians 11. Eschatological aspect again here. And verse 2. Verse 2. For I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a, well, we're back to chaste there again, but a clean, pure virgin to Christ. Probably because he uses the term virgin as a metaphor here, then chaste would be a good translation, because chastity goes along with virginity. That I may present you as a chaste, but it happens to be the same word for pure or clean, virgin to Christ. And of course, the sexual context would just be used as a metaphor, not a virgin in the sexual, physical sense, but in the sense of admixture of false doctrine or allegiance to false ideas and false gods. A virgin, in other words, would be serving only Christ. Well, I see a virgin. We're back to singleness of mind then. A virgin that has had no relations with anyone else, that's waiting only for the marriage day for her husband. Singleness of mind then. Singleness, we have the singleness concept again, the single heart again. So we have purity, so we have cleanliness, so we have chastity, so we have virginity, as it's mentioned here. So you get all these concepts then drawn together. Well, when is Paul really going to present them to Christ as his virgin, as his bride? Well, that's way over in Revelation 19. That seems to be another eschatological reference as well. Now, before looking at a few more of these, let me point out something else just in review. We saw from John 15, because I want to tie what we're saying in these two messages in with what we have said before on John 15, the parable of the true vine. We saw from John 15 the concept of cleanliness over there. John 15:3, ye are clean, now ye are clean. So we saw from John 15 that this cleansing process for the believer comes through the clean word. That is where we get this cleansing activity. There is no other way. There is the passive side of 2 Corinthians 5:17. I hope this is just getting worked down into you as doctrine now. There's the passive side to purity, holiness, cleanliness, perfection, and everything. There's the passive side that comes in one's conversion experience. You are made, all the righteousness of Christ is imputed to you. His purity, his moral uprightness, his ethical excellencies are imputed unto you at that time. But that may only last for a couple of moments or a couple of hours at the most, until on the way home from the meeting where you got saved, someone cuts you off in traffic. Then you lost that passive purity. It won't just stay there passively. I mean, it will stay there legally passively, but not actively passively, because those are mutually contradictory terms there. You have to go over to John chapter 15. How can I keep this in my life, as well as grow into more of it experientially in my life? John 15:3 is the answer. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. It was the word of Christ, the heavenly doctrine that he brought to the apostles. Continuous teaching of the heavenly oracles that brought purity, singleness of mind, singleness of heart, that brought cleanliness to the lives of the apostles. And then they pick up the same thing. Acts 2:42 speaks of the apostles' doctrine. And then what did chapter 2 and verse 46 speak of? They ate their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. What did that for them? Again, it was the apostles' doctrine. Again, it's picked up, this time by someone who was not on the scene in Christianity at that time, by Paul in Ephesians 5. In Ephesians 5, verses 26 and 27. It's picked up again. That the cleansing process for the believer comes from the clean word. A pure word, as some people say, which is a good way to say it, but just make sure you don't mix in your false notions. That he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. So we're back to katharizo, the verb here. Cleanse it. Purify it. with the washing of water by the word. But notice how King James goes from clean to pure to chaste, back and forth. How? Cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. Again, he's using Old Testament symbolic ritualism there, the washing. We saw it with David. David was using it in Psalm 51 and verse 2, washing. We're not literally washed in the sense of being physically washed, but literal in the sense of being spiritually washed by the water of the word. That he might present it to himself, a glorious church, not having spot. We're back to being unclean. We know what spots on pants or shirts are. It's not impure, it's unclean. Or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. And we know the blemish idea is an Old Testament idea that carries over into the New as well. Turn back to the book of Psalms chapter 12. If what we're saying in this area is true, then the reverse would be true. You'll never be cleansed and therefore prepared for the eschatological coming of Christ with a compromised word, with an impure word, with a compromising message. A person just would never be ready. Here we have Psalm chapter 12 and verse 6. The words of the Lord are pure words. That's fine to translate it pure now because the concept is purity and not cleanliness here. As silver is cleaned in a furnace of earth, no, that's where it's purified. That's where the admixture is taken away from it, if you know something about the smelting process. The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. That means that the pure word can give you a pure heart then. Psalm 19 and verse 8. Psalm 19 and verse 8. Now, men's ideas and notions, they won't clean you up. They'll dirty us up.
Right.
But we can be cleansed by the clean word. If we'll just stay with the clean word, we'll be clean.
Hallelujah.
But it has to be non-compromising message, though. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. Now we're back to that concept of singleness of eye of Matthew 5. You see, or Matthew 6. You see how all of these things seem to tie together. Hebrews chapter 10. Skipping way over to the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 22. Seems to be saying the same thing as John 15:3, Ephesians 5:26 and 27, which they themselves evidently are based upon the understanding of ritual washings in cultic Israelite worship. Hebrews 10 and verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience. Sprinkling is the sprinkling of water there. And our bodies washed with pure water. Now we're back to that adjective again, or maybe here it would be better again to go to the word clean. Don't use any dirty water to wash the body, but our bodies washed with clean water. Now here he seems to then be speaking of, like we saw way back in the beginning in 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 1, sins of the body, our bodies washed with clean water, and the more spiritual type sins of the mind or the heart, our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience. It seems to deal with both. Because, for instance, in 1 Corinthians 6, the Apostle Paul speaks of fornication as a sin against the body. And there are other sins outside the body that are not against the body. But he said fornication is a sin against the body. So he, again, himself there is making a contrast, as he does in 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 1. And then in conclusion, let's look at a few final verses that speak of the eschatological context of the purity of the Christian. For instance, 1 John 3, verses 2 and 3, and if I remember the word used here, we're all the way back to hagnos, the first word that we gave you. 1 John 3, verses 2 and 3. Beloved, now are we the sons of God. So we know he's not just saying that we're called the sons of God. Verse 1, but now we are the sons of God. We'll not be any more than we are now. But it doth not yet appear what we shall be in other areas. Legally, we're a son of God. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself even as he is pure. Pure, back to hagnos, purifieth, probably back to katharizo. So here's the eschatological aspect of it all as well. And it seems like in our understanding of the other teaching in the New Testament, that the only way we're going to be understanding what he says here in verse 2 and having this hope in ourselves is because of the teaching of the Word, because that prepares us for his coming. So it's not, in other words, he's not just saying that just having this hope about Jesus coming back is going to purify you. Because then a lot of Christians could have the hope that Christ is going to return and then live a wicked life. It's more like you've got the hope that he'll return and that he'll return to the right person, you being in a right state, according to Ephesians 5. No spot, no wrinkle, nothing that causes any blemish at all. So 1 John 3, 2-3, with 1 Peter 1. With 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19. For as much as ye know that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold for your vain life received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. There's that concept of blemish and spot. And then that, along with 1 John 2, verses 15 through 17. 1 John 3, 2-3, with 1 Peter 1, 18-19, with 1 John 2, 15-17. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So implicitly, what do we have here? The concept of doubleness. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. Trying to love the Father and to love the world at the same time. It's this implicit recognition of the concept of duplicity, because one is not single in his understanding and affections. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. The world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God has a single heart, has a single mind. He that doeth the will of God will abide forever. How else can a person really do the will of God? Because you become so confused when you get your eyes off the pure Jesus Christ and the holy Jesus Christ. We don't have our eyes set on the sinning Socrates or the perverted Plato, but on the pure and holy Jesus Christ. He lived an example that was pure and clean, a perfect example before us. That's why the idea of singleness seems to imply that your affection and that your attention has to be lodged completely upon him. Every man that hath this hope in himself purifieth himself even as he is pure. What hope? That when he comes, you'll be like him because you'll see him as he is, so that you patterned your life after his life that he lived here on the earth. And then for that, we have to go back to 1 Peter again, 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning with verse 21. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow in his steps. And here's some of his steps. Who did no sin. Who did no sin. To the best of our ability, with God's grace, his help, and his Spirit, this is what we're to be striving after. Who did no sin. You see, in the final analysis, it's not the movie star, it's not the too highly paid sports figure, it's not anyone that you look up to because of any of their worldly achievements they have that ever, as they say, will cut the mustard in getting into the kingdom of God. And it's just I don't know, it's a blessing to me when I've seen what's taken place here. Everything for God's people works out for their good. They're going to get benefit from that. I take into account all the things that have happened here the last few weeks. And people can have this that looks good in them and that looks good in them. And then you look inferior to them because of this, that, or the other. And nothing is more important than your knowledge and your practice of the Word. This person or that person can know all about this and be skilled over here. Doesn't matter to me at all. Doesn't matter to me at all. That's not what we're after. That's not what's going to get the person through. And sometimes it's that most simple of people that doesn't have admixture because they're not a compounded person that seems to understand these things and desire these things and put these things into practice. And that's why Paul is writing over there in 1 Corinthians 1 how he and we can just glory in the foolishness of men's wisdom out there, the foolishness of men's experiences out there. The morning I learned about what happened with the latest shuttle endeavor, I was sad that people lost their lives and now little boys and girls don't have their mommy and their daddy anymore. But I glory in that. NASA down there thinks that they're God. They think they're infallible. They think they can do anything they want to do. And so the thing just blows up in the sky. It costs $2 billion. And these educated people who, all they forgot to do is attach one little ring in there, or it's too cold to send the thing up. Why don't you just check the thermometer outside? I probably check my thermometer more often than they do. Look at here. We simple people, we check the thermometer. It's below freezing. Don't send that thing up if it's below freezing. And all these educated geniuses go about doing what they think they need to do. They really think we're going to go out there and push the frontiers of space to kingdom come, and maybe we'll make it into God's throne room itself. So boastful and proud of the space age. They can do anything down there. Prideful group of people. And so I laugh, not at the death of the people, but I laugh at the whole failure of the program now. This year it was going to be 24 missions into space. Maybe none, except one that got a couple of thousand feet. 24 we're going to send, bragging and boasting about this. My. Forget a little simple thing to check your thermometer when you get up in the morning. Don't push the button until you look out there on your grandmother's thermometer. You blow up a $2 billion machine as a result of that. And you cost 7 people their lives as a result of that. This high five attitude they have down there in the space program that we can accomplish anything by our own power and by our own skills and by our own genius just makes you laugh. I was horrified when I learned about that the people died just, incinerated there, but I laughed at the same time. What a setback to these fools that think they're so intelligent they can do anything. They can outthink God, and now they're so rational they don't even need God then. What fools they are. Not to check the thermometer in their backyard before they left the house that morning. My. And then I think about the foolishness of the rest of the world and the rest of this country just going on and on about these poor 7 people that died. Oh, and lower all the flags, and it's in all the newspapers. And the first thing that came to me that morning is how wicked and how unfair society is, because how many people have died, good, basic, maybe they're sinners, but I mean basically people who were trying to do their best. They helped their neighbors out all the time. They weren't some arrogant, boastful group that thought they could push the frontiers of space out there, die, and there's no recognition for them at all. Pastors were expected the next service to come and make some mention of the shuttle, and let's pray for these families here. What makes those families more special than that little grandmother out there, that little black Negro lady who has slaved her life away and then dies in obscurity? See how unfair society is? That's why I would go out of my way not to mention, not to praise these 7 people that died in the shuttle. Because there have been more important people, more valuable people, people who had more to offer to life and to this world than these educated, arrogant, boastful people. Catholics, Jews, and atheists all mixed in together there. I thought, what a tragedy that we praise these people. Their pictures will get on stamps or coins or flyers or something. And all that happened to them is they blew up in a shuttle. What a wasteful way to die. I mean, think about the person that ran out there, the black Negro lady who's maybe crippled in one leg, who ran out into the railroad tracks and saved a child from an ongoing train, and then she was crushed underneath that. That's a person that deserves having all the flags in the country lowered for her. Not someone who's got a PhD degree who wants to blaspheme God in their life and what they do, deny God in their works. There would be a person that I'd want to sermonize about for a while, because you can get an example from that. What example can you get from the arrogancy and the pride of these people? Well, I've been waiting to mention that, and now I've got the opportunity here. I'm not going to sermonize and praise those people. I would praise the Negro lady somewhere who gave her life, or the man who drowned in a pool while trying to save another boy or something. His picture ought to end up on stamps. But you know what? Those people go down in the graveyard, no records of them at all. It's only the famous, the rich, the beautiful, the illustrious. It's unfair. Life is unfair. That's why if we're going to live life, you might as well live as a Christian, because it's going to be unfair any way you live it. You live in an unfair world. So it's best, if you're going to have to live in a wicked world and live in an unfair situation, which is reality out there, to live as a Christian. And you know what? One day God's going to make the balances even out.
Praise God.
One day He's going to make everything just and right again. The devil is in control of this world, we're told in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4. At this time, one day God's going to righten everything back up again, make everything just and equal again. And those that were exalted in this life, we're told, are going to be put down. And those that were put down in this life are going to be exalted. We have to wait. We have to have patience. We have to endure to the end. And those that are put down as Pentecostals, religious people, oh, you don't go to discos, you don't go to movies, you don't. They go down the list of what you don't do. You don't know what you're missing. You can tell them, yes, I do, too. I've read the Bible. I know what I'm missing, a life of misery, torment, pain, getting up every day just sick. Sick with yourself, sick with life, sick with everything around you. I don't live that way anymore, and I hope you don't.
Praise God.